I'm standing here at Newland and Coast Highway, right by the entrance to State Beach. Almost 100 years ago, this was the site of one of the worst civil rights tragedies in Orange County history. You'll learn about it in just a minute.
I'm Chris Epting. I'm an author and storyteller, and I love the history of Huntington Beach, especially the hidden history. For the past 2 seasons, we've helped uncover many little-known stories that help illuminate the past. Now, join us as we dig deeper and discover even more secrets. Welcome to Hidden Huntington Beach, Season 3.
Chris Jepsen grew up here in Huntington Beach. As a local historian, he has helped document many important stories, but perhaps no other story of his garnered more attention than the one about the Pacific Beach Club. His research was first published about 10 years ago, but years before that, Chris had become intrigued with the story of the beach club, its clientele, and a mysterious fire. Well, Chris, just to kind of start the story, let's talk about where we're standing right now. We're in the parking lot by the Newland entrance, Coast Highway. What would this have been like 100 years ago?
This would have been sand. There would have been a narrow highway, sort of the beginnings of Coast Highway out there. And then there would have been, between the highway and us, there would have been the Pacific Electric tracks. There would have been trestles built actually to keep the tracks even and up off the sand. And then beyond that, it would have been all marsh.
And in terms of the Pacific Beach Club, let's talk about that a little bit right now. The entrance would have been around here, right? Like, what would have looked like?
Down this way, about the entrance to the Cabrillo Mobile Home Park down there, just across the highway would have been the entrance to the main entrance to the club. But the club property itself extended about 7.5 acres in a narrow strip that ran roughly between Newland and Beach Boulevard.
That's a big parcel of land.
It is.
So Los Angeles, obviously, before Orange County, had kind of attempted to create exclusive black beach resorts. What happened when they did that? What was the scene like up there? What was the mood? Were they successful?
Los Angeles, of course, was the big built-up area and had a much larger black population, but there were very few places where they could go and be safe and feel safe, and the beaches were segregated. So there were pockets where they might be allowed for a while, or there were areas where they were strictly limited to this little piece of often less desirable beach property. But if they crossed over the line, there could be violence, there could be legal repercussions.
Why the move to Orange County? I mean, was Orange County, were the laws down here different? Was the public more accepting? What predicated the move from Los Angeles to try and open a club this substantial in Orange County?
Orange County has always had, historically, a black population that's around 2%. And so, in a way, people weren't even really thinking about that issue down here. So there was no official segregation on the beaches of Orange County. So that made this a good spot for to consider having black Angelenos come down here and make this their beach.
Why don't we head off to the actual site now where we can fully unpack the story, what happened in Huntington Beach, and more importantly, what happened to the Pacific Beach Club.
Absolutely.
So Chris, we're standing right at the location, right where the Pacific Beach Club wasn't just a plan, it was starting to take shape. Give us the story. Why was it here? Whose idea was it? How did it wind up being in Huntington Beach?
Okay, so in 1924, there's a white Los Angeles attorney named Hal R. Clark, who was a bit of a shady customer, really. He'd been indicted for ambulance chasing and selling oil property he didn't own and mail fraud. He had a rich history, Better Call Saul kind of stuff. And but somewhere in there, he may have had some good intentions buried too. And he bought about 7.5 acres down here of this property here we're standing on, and he set up what he called the Pacific Beach Club. And the idea was he was going to build a beach club specifically for black people to come down and enjoy.
And he's white.
He's white, right. And he's thinking largely of those from Los Angeles to come down here and have a safe, pleasant, not just a spot on the beach as they had been able to eke out occasionally in Los Angeles, but a resort. And this place would have had a large dance hall, bathhouses, 200-tent campground, an amusement zone, like a little fun zone. There were a restaurant, a grocery store, barber shop. It had all kinds. It's a whole resort. And if it were still here today, it would be one of the major historic landmarks in Orange County because it towered up above this property here. And the idea then was not that he would own the club and make the profit off it in the long run. What he was doing was setting it all up, and then members, these black families in Los Angeles, would be paying memberships, which would then make them part owners of the club until eventually it was entirely black owned and operated. And the board of this club was really impressive. Their president, E. Burton Cerruti, was a black attorney from Los Angeles. He'd helped form the Los Angeles chapter of the NAACP and a couple other different civil rights organizations. He was also one who was really outspoken against the depiction of the Klan and Birth of a Nation in Hollywood. He took a strong stance against that. There were other, the first black assemblyman of California was on the board.
Prominent people.
And Joseph Blackburn Bass, who was the editor of the California Eagle, which was the big Southern California black newspaper, well respected, was also on their board. So, and it was doctors and lawyers and attorneys and others who were ministers who were really important in the black community.
What was the reaction like from the city, from the chamber, from city council? I mean, was this a welcome idea in Huntington Beach? Again, it's 1925 at this point.
This was not a welcome idea locally, and not just Huntington Beach. Really, as I say, this was between Huntington and Newport at that time, and both the Huntington Beach and Newport Beach chambers of commerce came out strongly against it early on. Did not want this here, and but they were hardly the only ones. The Pacific Electric, whose railway ran right along the property, got in on fighting this, and they, in fact, denied access over their tracks for construction.
This is an upstream battle. I mean, this is something, to pull this off is going to take a lot of tenacity. Really, they're breaking a lot of local rules, it seems. Chris, before we get to exactly what happened to the Pacific Beach Club, how far along did it get in terms of construction?
Yeah, March 25th, they break ground. Almost immediately, they start having problems with the contractors because they're being threatened. And they're hearing things as they're working, like, this is going to make a great fire at some point. So they lose one contractor after another. Construction process crawls to a halt. Not to a halt, but it gets slower and slower. That said, though, progress does continue. Things start to rise into the sky, and there was it would have been this what they had already. The dance hall was being built. Everything was in this Egyptian style of architecture. The Egyptian theme tied into the theme of Africa and tying into roots and connections. So that was all planned. That was all part of it. About September 25th, they've made a lot of progress, and they held a big promotional event here at the beach. And you think of how narrow the highway was out here at that time, and there were about 2,000 Black Angelinos came down here to this spot, and we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere in 1925. We're between the cities and whatnot, so to have those kind of crowds here is sort of amazing all by itself. But they had a grand time that day. They had a picnic. They had there were speeches, and there were there's a bathing beauty parade. So it was a fun day on the beach in the sun.
So the gathering that was here, how successful was it? Did they sell a lot of memberships that day?
It sold memberships. It was a good kickoff, but it really didn't, it certainly didn't get the job done. They had a long way to go still in selling memberships. They were selling life memberships, which included part ownership of the club, for $80 a head.
Forever.
Yes.
$80.
Yeah, $80 for life membership.
Chris, what happens next chronologically? Get us to the fatal fire that takes the Pacific Beach Club down. What's the sequence of events that gets us there?
The club the first stage of construction is nearing completion. Things are coming along, but there's still a lot to do. And the plan, with all of the delays and stalls in construction, the plan is at this point to have the club open on Lincoln's birthday in 1926. But January 21st, 1926, there was a fire started, arson. The night watchman, Alonzo Sneed, whose apartment was sort of at the back of the bathhouse, looked out his window, and he told the police he saw two men hunched over a fire that they started at the corner of one of the buildings, and that the two men ran in opposite directions once the fire had started to two different cars, one of them driving towards Huntington Beach, the other one driving towards Newport. The water lines hadn't been connected yet, so there really was no good way to stop the fire, and it burned everything. Really, the only thing that survived, there was a tool shed for some of the contractors that survived. The only other thing, and even the tracks, the trestles for the Pacific Electric got scorched.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of talk that, there'd been people heard things that had been said, that people had seen things. And so the word was that, someone would be arrested soon, that there were enough clues that it would help them track someone down. No one was ever identified or arrested.
Do you have any personal theories about what might have happened? I know it's pure speculation, that's the caveat, but is there anyone outside the obvious that you think may have had a part in this?
Well, it's, obviously at many levels it's hard not to say the Klan because they were here. But I mean, you can't ignore the fact that you had community organizations coming out early and often and loudly saying they didn't want this, and they were the ones most vocal about this. I always think it's interesting to point out that there is one other person who did have something to gain from the Pacific Beach Club burning, and oddly enough, that is Hal R. Clark, the promoter. He was in over his head. He had invested money with the idea he would sell these memberships, and the memberships weren't selling fast enough to pay for all the expenses. He was in pretty deep, and when the place burned down, insurance covered most of it. He recouped most of his losses, and to his credit, was able to pay back the investors, the members, ultimately for their part in it, something for which he was respected in the black community in Los Angeles, as I understand it, for the rest of his life.
Chris, do you think it would be appropriate to mark this site today with a plaque or marker or something that helps bring the story to life for the next generation that walks along here?
Yeah, I think anytime you can help educate people about their surroundings, their history, the history in their own backyard, and particularly in this case, we're talking about a site where there are, so many thousands of people come here every year and are going to walk past a plaque or a monument, something that would help tell that story. And the fact that, too, it highlights a chapter of black history in Southern California that is, overlooked, that has been overlooked, ignored for many generations. And this is a great spot to interpret history and to talk about that.
Chris, I want to thank you first and foremost for helping to bring this story to light years ago. You created so much awareness, you generated so much attention, so now other historians can look into it, hopefully discover more of what happened here. But a lot of it is because of your efforts, so thank you very much. I want to thank you for watching this episode of Hidden Huntington Beach. I encourage you to check out our Facebook group, which is simply called Hidden Huntington Beach. You can learn all kinds of other things not included in our episodes that I think you'll find interesting. But again, today's special thanks to Chris Jepsen, and thank you for joining us.